Testing. Testing one, two, three. 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 Testing one, two, three.
Good morning, everyone. Room 2B is locked, so we actually, Representative Chafee and I had just gone over there to see if we could get in, and no dice. So here we are.
We're in room 2D and it's unlocked.
Doors are locked. Can't get in.
Okay.
Happy to come back, but can't get in. Badges weren't working either, so I will walk back over.
Test, test.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are convening the Connecticut Conservation and Development Policies Plan Committee today. Is that the best way to say that? I guess continuing Legislative Committee on State Planning and Development. Today, I seem to be, I don't know if Senator Rahman is joining us in person, but I do see him online. He's having some computer issues, but I am sure he is happy to be listening in as well. We are looking forward to the presentation today by Rebecca Auger. And when you are ready, feel free to go ahead and start because we know we have limited time today. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you for seeing us today. We know that you're all very busy. I'm Rebecca Auger. I'm the Policy Development Coordinator in the Office of Responsible Growth. With me is Bruce Witchen and Becca Dahl, also from the Office of Responsible Growth. And we're here to discuss the Conservation and Development Policies Plan for 25 to 30. We wanted to get with you today. If I can advance my slides here. To really kick off the process with you, because by law, we are required to present a draft plan to you later this fall. And so we are having to start work on it now. And there has been a lot of discussion and recommendations made to revamp the plan. And we wanted to touch base with you before we go too far down any one path on changing the plan, because ultimately it's this committee that needs to recommend the plan to the full General Assembly for adoption. So we know that some of the members of this committee are familiar with the plan and actually several iterations of it, but for some of you, it's brand new. So we would like to just go through a really quick history of the plan, what current statutes require of the plan, the recommendations that have been made to change it, the work to date that OPM has conducted, and then where we really wanted to focus our energy today was to hear from you on 4 foundational areas of the plan that we feel are ripe for some change. And we just wanted to get a sense from you what your expectations around those changes are. So just to go through the history of the plan really briefly, This legislative committee was established in 1967 to start developing a plan that was first enacted by executive order in 1971. And that first plan really set out executive agency policies around land and water resources. It has since been expanded to cover additional areas, air resources, social resources, and so on. After the first plan was adopted, the General Assembly got involved in its process by enacting statutes requiring it to be a legislatively adopted plan instead of an executive governor's plan. And it expanded its purview to transportation and other issues. And from in the 1980s and 1990s, there were regular cycles of planning and adoption of a plan. Because of a feature of the plan, the locational guide map, this committee was very involved in monitoring implementation of the plan through applications to change that guide map. Executive agencies were using that guide map to help make determinations on funding. And so often municipalities or property owners were coming before the committee with applications to change the map because they had sewer extension or water infrastructure projects that they wanted to accomplish. So from about 1980 to 2010, this committee actually heard 39 applications for changing the map. So there was a regular visiting of the policies within it and as well as the map within the C&D plan. But in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, with the rise of smart growth as a movement nationally, as well as several studies that were occurring around tax policy and economic development policies and their impact on land use patterns in the state and the Northeast in general, there was a renewed interest in the C&D plan and using it as a vehicle to provoke some change. And so with the 2005 to 10 C&D plan, it took on a new form and it developed the 6 growth management principles that are now actually enshrined in statute for local plans of conservation and development, not for the C&D plan. They live only in the C&D plan itself, and they are the guiding framework of the plan now. After that 2005 plan was adopted, the General Assembly actually went back and created a new feature requiring the delineation of what are called priority funding areas. And this, I believe, was intended to help better incorporate local planning into the C&D plan. But the first priority funding area map wasn't adopted until the 2013 to 18 plan. And once priority funding areas came into play, this committee has not seen interim map change applications and hasn't received the same type of annual reporting on implementation that it had prior. So its involvement in monitoring the implementation of the plan has been greatly diminished. And then finally, just to touch on the current plan, which was developed in 2017 as a minor revision of the 2013 plan. It was ready to go, but it was not taken up by the General Assembly until just about a year ago. And so it wasn't adopted until 4 years into its 5-year lifespan. And I think that's partially what provoked the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future to be required to address the C&D plan. So just a quick overview of the current law around the plan. You can read the statutes. It requires a 5-year planning cycle. It has a long list of issues that need to be considered within the plan. That's an accumulation of General Assembly issues and concerns over the last 40 years. It could be significantly tightened up. The issues are all revolving around sustainable conservation and development. Again, continuing committee is responsible for holding a public hearing and recommending the plan to the full assembly. The statutes address implementation, where state agencies are supposed to use the plan in developing their own plans and programs. They are required to be consistent with the C&D plan when they're doing certain actions which use $200,000 or more in state or federal resources. Those actions are around the acquisition of real property, the development or improvement of real property, or the acquisition of public transportation. The priority funding area statutes are in a separate section. Again, before priority funding areas, the locational guide map had these categories, 4 towards development and then 4 towards conservation, as you can see on the screen. They were discrete categories, landed on a map, and they, again, provoked a lot of requests for change. In addition, the annual reporting on implementation that the committee would receive would actually report state investments by map category. The priority funding area law limits growth-related projects, and by growth-related projects, they really just mean the same actions that are required to be consistent with the plan. Again, $200,000 or more, et cetera. There are exceptions, though, for projects that are supported by local plans of conservation and development. OPM feels that the priority funding area concept is perhaps inappropriate at this level. If it's a statewide map trying to be used to make site-specific administrative decisions, and we're not sure that that's really an appropriate fit for it. So we're hoping to work with you over the next several months to figure out some potential alternatives to priority funding areas. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Just to touch briefly on the CCDF working group recommendations. Again, the CCDF was charged with making a variety of recommendations around planning and land use issues generally, one of which was specifically to the C&D plan. So there was a working group devoted just to the C&D plan. And they felt that the plan did not offer as much value as it could. And they suggested that the plan be transformed into a more visionary and objective setting plan based on current data and analysis. They recommended that it remain a legislatively adopted plan. They suggested that there be more meaningful engagement by a variety of stakeholders in the development of the plan and just generally a more transparent process. They wanted to ensure that the plan gets implemented, and then they saw an opportunity to enhance the role of COGS in helping with vertical integration between state level planning objectives and local planning and development. They did make some legislative recommendations for this session. And so House Bill 6647 incorporates those recommendations. One was to tighten up that list of considerations for the C&D plan just to more succinctly express the intention of the plan itself, but also some important milestone shifts in the development of the plan, not delaying the 25 to 30 plan at all, but just shifting some of the interim process areas. And so you can see on the screen, by September 1st, under current law, we are supposed to present a draft to this committee. The HB 6647 pushes that out to December and basically shifts some of those milestones out a couple of months. It also changes the law currently requires OPM to conduct public hearings in cooperation with the COGS. It suggests that solicitation of feedback from the COGS could be done through a referral process, and that the OPM secretary has discretion on how we conduct our engagement around the plan itself. Work to date that OPM has been accomplishing, we've been discussing the CCDF recommendations with state agencies. We're finding general support for a more measurably objective setting plan. We have been in talks with the new state GIS office, and they are ready to help us use data in a more meaningful way to understand our current conditions and to help us set priorities for that 5-year plan. We're all much more accustomed to using technology, so our intention is to use it to conduct a more transparent process and seek input on a regular basis. And then we've just been brainstorming around how exactly to reframe the plan. And that is why we're here today. So the first area we really wanted to discuss with you is the growth management principles, which I'm not going to go through. They're on the screen. They are very broad principle statements, and they were, again, devised in the early 2000s when we were in a very different development climate than what we are in today. The CCDF recommended potentially revising this. OPM would like to suggest, actually, rather than putting our efforts into trying to revise the growth management principles, to actually just use them differently and not frame the plan around them. We are envisioning framing the plan around a discrete set of priorities for that 2025 to 2030 planning period and developing objectives around the priorities. We're not suggesting throwing out the growth management principles. Again, they are enshrined in statute for local POCDs, and we may want to revise them as we go through this process. But we'd rather focus on revamping the plan, stepping away from them as the organizing framework of the plan. If you look at the plan now, they really just serve an organizational purpose where a growth management principle is put out there, a list of policies is thrown out underneath it. There's no prioritization, and the interconnectedness is not really highlighted between the policies. So an agency might be very focused on one particular growth management principle and neglect the policies that still impact whatever they're trying to do located under another one. We'd rather take a look at what is the priority area or issue that we're trying to address, and what can each agency do or not do to impact our achievement of whatever objectives we set. So we just want to make sure, because this would be a significant change from what the plan looks like now, and it would require this committee to help us identify what those priorities are for the 25 to 30 period. So we want to make sure that we're all on the same page with this idea. So I'd like to just ask for comment. Hopefully we can be informal with this today.
I, first of all, really appreciate the presentation. I am sorry that we don't have more in the room right now. We do have a few more on Zoom, and I know that Representative Zillow is probably about to arrive. I am appreciative that we're starting today, because as new chairs, both on the House side and the Senate side, and thankfully we have former chairs on the committee, which I think will be helpful. I think it's important that we have sort of both the look back folks and the look forward folks, is probably the best way to say that. I think it's sort of mutual guidance. You're looking for guidance from us. We're also looking for guidance from you. I like the idea of using the 6 areas differently than they have been used in the past, because I think that will get us. I think that some of the challenges that I've heard from people on the plan previously, well, first of all, taking so much time to actually pass it, which we hope to never have that happen again. We will do our best. I'm committing you now. But having said that, I think that especially around the PFAs and around these principles, I think that is what a lot of municipalities seem to be telling us, is that we need better guidance, or we need more exclusive and specific guidance. So I think that is partially what we are looking for as well. I don't know if that is what you are hearing, or if you even hear, from folks on that level. I know, especially around conservation, there's a lot more concern and request for, as you said, these are such broad principles. I think that it's great when we go broad because we can fit a lot in there, but then sometimes it's too broad and then we have decision paralysis. Right. Or analysis paralysis. Obviously the 6 areas, especially around conserving and restoring natural environment, cultural and historical resources, traditional rural lands, protecting and ensuring integrity of environmental assets. I mean, we have so much that needs to be done, that could be done better, and no criticism for the previous plan, just I think we need more specifics. And so I think that's working together. I think that's the guidance that we're hoping that we can all sort of mutually provide, both from your expertise and from, hearing the feedback that we all have heard, even from this previous plan already. I just had someone in my office, or on Zoom, I should say, a few days ago, talking about biodiversity. And I'm sure that you've heard from folks on that as well. So, and the protection thereof. I want to give my vice chair a chance to comment. So if Representative Chafee, I'll let you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to echo the comments of the chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's very insightful. Obviously, we're both new to this committee, but I very much look forward to working on this with you and everybody else. My background professionally, I'm a civil engineer, so I am very interested in things of this nature. I think that when you look across our state, I'll speak specifically for my town. Unfortunately, we suffer under poor planning, people in the past. Middletown, our riverfront was cut off from the town due to Route 9. And I know you could repeat that conversation in so many communities, being severed by infrastructure in the past that was built that, unfortunately, people did not have the foresight to look forward and see how this is actually going to impact our town. So I do agree with a lot of the main bullet points on this. You know, I think that when you look at all the various agencies we have in this state and everybody's kind of operating in their own silo under their own plan, it makes sense for everybody to kind of be tugging on the rope in the same direction, make sure we're moving forward. One of the things that I'd really like to take a look at with this, I see the first point here is to review areas with existing or currently planned infrastructure. I've commented quite a bit since being here. In Connecticut, due to our industrial past, we have railroad beds and railroad spurs all across the state. I think it's such an underutilized asset that we should really study and take a look at. I know when you start looking into railroads, it gets very murky on who owns the line and who actually controls it. But I do think that we really should study that in depth and see where the state could start taking over some of these assets and investing in public transportation. So that's just kind of an initial comment. Like I said, I look forward to working with everybody on this. I find this stuff very exciting. So happy to be part of the team.
I'd also add, if we can, go back to PFAs for a minute. I don't know
Yeah.
if we have, so tell me a little bit more about that in terms of the reasoning why there's a feeling like they are not appropriate now
So I'm actually going to jump
as
in
they
here.
were in the past.
So, I don't know that they were ever appropriate in the past either, and this may
Okay.
be more of a personal opinion. You know, Connecticut is set up that it is the locality that makes land use decisions, right? And so a statewide plan really can never drill down to site-specific knowledge. It's always going to generalize. The data that we have to look at is always going to be of a general nature. And so when an agency is deciding a very site-specific, like, should we fund brownfields redevelopment in, a far-flung, let's say, Norfolk? Well, on a generalized map of the state, Norfolk doesn't jump out as a place where we want to really develop heavily. And that because it's, not on major transportation, it doesn't have a lot of existing infrastructure, et cetera. And so it may not appear on such a generalized map as a worthwhile investment, whereas we might have policies that are very supportive of redevelopment of an existing mill or whatever it may be. So our considerations are, if we have a more robust plan that has more measurably, measurable, something that you could demonstrably implement objectives, those should be enough to hold agencies accountable to funding, making the right determinations in projects, rather than trying to rely on a map that is at this scale and they're trying to decide a tiny pixel in that map. We're not, obviously it's up to this committee, and that would require a legislative change because the priority funding areas is in law. And so by law, we have to develop a map. We also at OPM don't know how agencies are using the map, if they're using it to decide not to fund projects. We don't know. We only know when they've funded a project.
And how many times has it been used? Has that been, do you know that off the top of your head, just how many times?
We don't feel it's being effectively used now, no.
Okay.
But the history is, with the locational guide map, there was a period of time where there was a lot of complaints that agencies were over relying on the map to make their decisions and ignoring the policies in the plan. And so there's a balance there to be struck. We feel that if we have, good objectives in the plan, that's what's going to drive or should drive some agency decisions rather than a map. We believe fully in using maps in the
Right.
plan either depict our planning concepts, to explain how we're arriving at our priorities, but not as an administrative tool for implementing the plan.
That makes sense. I would also say in terms of, you said that the other agencies are supportive of some of the recommendations coming out of CCDF. Was there anything more specific that they were supportive of? That they liked, or I should say liked the idea of, and obviously theory versus implementation, two different
Right.
things, but
No, we heard from some agencies, they actually preferred the plan before it got changed significantly with the growth management principles and the priority funding areas, in that it had more specific policy objectives in it that was helpful to them. We also heard that just the process of planning itself was very helpful because it forces us to bring all of our agencies together and talk about what are we working on, what are our priorities, and how are we working together. But that in between the planning cycles, that may have fallen off. And that's not true across the board, but that was something that we heard. So every agency has plans that they have to do, whether by statute or by federal law. This plan is not intended to replicate those or get in the way of any of those. I think agencies appreciate the idea of having a plan that helps coordinate among agencies to make sure that we're all working towards the same objectives, and that we can see where we have a role to play.
I think it's easier for the towns as well, because then they have clear guidance on
Correct.
where everybody's headed.
Correct.
And that when they are interacting with various agencies, they're getting the same line of, this is what it is, this is how we do it, and it's universal.
Right. You can know then that,
Mhm.
DOH has its consolidated plan that it's meeting, but it also is trying to achieve these objectives set out in the C&D plan. So how do I fit what we're trying to do at the local level into that?
I don't want to not offer you questions.
I guess just in terms of the map, was that updated with the last C&D plan that was adopted? Is it updated every time there's a new C&D plan?
Yes, and it was minimally updated. Bruce, there is an underlying set of census data incorporated with that. So that gets updated. Obviously, this is a 5-year cycle. Census is a 10-year. But there is interim data to use. And then I'm not sure what other data sets might have been updated with the last plan. Right. I don't believe there was significant change between 2013 and the 2018 plan, which is our current plan. And with the locational guide maps also, I don't think it changed significantly from each plan. Obviously, it evolved over time. I think there was land covered data used at some point in those locational guide maps as well.
If you look at the mapping, the primary changes probably were as technology improved. I probably was old enough to be there, but I wasn't for the original maps, and I've always envisioned them with crayons on a piece of paper. And then as GIS and other technology came along, that made the mapping change. Rebecca had mentioned the interim changes to the map that the continuing committee had to rule on. And I recall one that I was involved with was in the town of Prospect, where that, if you are familiar with the banquet center that you encounter coming from Waterbury into Prospect when they wanted to develop that, it turned out that a portion of the parcel was mapped as not an area appropriate for development, not because of any kind of actual criteria, wetlands or whatever. It was just way back in time when the map was originally done. The crayon was over on this side of the property instead of this side. So over time, with GIS improvements, that map was shifting. I don't believe there were any really substantive changes to it other than these technology changes.
All right, thank you.
Representative Zullo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rebecca, for being here. Sorry for being a little late. Traffic and the rain did not make it easy to get here. So first off, thank you for your hard work, and thank you for reaching out prior to today to kind of brainstorm and catch all of us up on what your role is and what you're expecting from us and what you're hoping to come from this process. I couldn't agree more that I think what we need are a concrete set of goals as far as this plan goes going forward. I mean, all we've been talking about, whether it's in housing, whether it's in P&D, frankly, in any committee, is that, we have a housing problem. We should have more explicit goals as part of this plan about what we're going to do to address that housing problem and how that interrelates with, fostering economic development, while still, obviously respecting local control. So I think that's key. Conservation has always been an element of this plan. And I think particularly because we have such a long and beautiful shoreline that it should continue to focus on that, but have more concrete goals. And I think, as you've noted, that, we have so much more GIS data and access to it now than we've ever had. And I think leveraging that data is going to be important. So I see our role as far as, what the next plan looks like is to work with you to make sure that it reflects the concrete goals that the legislature wants, that all of our colleagues are hoping to see for the state. Again, rather than those broad growth management principles. Obviously, housing and conservation come to mind, but I'm sure that there are others that we can come up with if we had unlimited time today. But that's what this process is for. So thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to working with you.
I think everybody else has sort of missed out. Did you have, yes?
The CCDF group did recommend that there be better vertical integration between this plan and local plans, essentially. And they felt like COGS were a good vehicle for helping to do that. OPM feels like that's a concept that is going to require a lot of exploration more, and we don't have sufficient time in this planning cycle to really address that in a concrete way. However, we feel like if we set up some good measurable objectives, it will help towns and COGS understand what the state's priorities are, and just by virtue of doing that, making it clearer, we think it will help local planning, rather than trying to, the group had recommendations around how COGS could do this, and consistency between different levels of planning and all of that kind of stuff. We can work on exploring that as this 25 to 30 plan is in place. I just don't feel we have sufficient time to really dive into that before the 25 to 30 plan really needs to be finished. We want to make sure that you are all comfortable with that, because it is a recommendation of the CCDF that we're trying to defer.
I think we may have to think about it a little and maybe perhaps not respond today. I'm a big fan of sleeping on things. I also think that, we do have people clamoring for using the COGS more effectively. And so I think if we can perhaps find a balance between those two things, that would be great. But we, as you said, we may not be able to do that within the time frame that we have for the specific plan. So I think we have a little thinking to do on that one.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's always on my mind, and that's certainly on some of my colleagues' minds, is making sure that we leverage the resources of the COGS in a way that's beneficial to local municipalities, and that certainly will streamline the process, but that also doesn't end up infringing on, what people perceive as local control, local rights. So it's that strategic balance. So for that reason, I think it's perfect. It's a great idea to say, we need to sleep on it and figure out what's going to be the best mechanism, but understanding what you're saying as far as resources go, timing goes, I think we're certainly sympathetic to that, and open-minded about when that goal can be realized.
Sadly, we'd like to do everything yesterday, but it doesn't work out that way.
Right. The last thing I'd like to touch on is implementation. The committee did recommend that there be a better feedback loop. Again, there's this feeling that the continuing committee really isn't involved in the plan beyond recommending it to the General Assembly anymore. And so they suggested there be a regular informal sort of feedback between this committee and state agencies, not just OPM. You're going to get regular reporting as you do now. It's annual. Hopefully it will be more robust reporting on implementation, because there'll be a way to measure implementation moving forward. But we'd like to suggest that maybe an annual meeting of this committee, or semi-annual, just to meet with agencies to better understand how's it going, what are you encountering, how are things changing over the course of the 5-year period that maybe we've had to put this objective aside for a little bit because something else cropped up, just to keep a little better continuity with this committee, so that in the next planning cycle there's hopefully more institutional knowledge moving ahead. So we'd like to, probably include recommendations around that and assume that that might happen as we move forward.
That sounds good to me. And not to create more meetings, but I like the idea of semi-annual only because then we're catching things. And then we're not surprised when 12 months have passed and something didn't happen or something didn't happen as we planned. Or, I think it's to be a little more nimble. I think that it's important for us to do it semi-annual. It would be my suggestion. Rep Zullo and I loved meat. So Chafee too.
Well, I love to meet with a purpose, though, more
Yes.
importantly. And if it's going to be semi-annual, which I can certainly agree with, what I would like to see, because we keep talking about data and you mentioned it again, is that when we're meeting with these state agencies, that we're developing not only these data-driven goals, right? These benchmarks that we're going to be looking in on to see, are we meeting these, or where are we at least as far as targeting them? But then, those soft goals, right? Those less data-driven goals, more maybe mission statement policy-driven goals, how are we working towards those? But if we're meeting semi-regularly, I would just want to know that we're doing so with the purpose of checking in to see where we are in relation to those sets of goals. And I think that's important, and I could fully support that.
We do love data. That would be great. At this time, are there any other comments before I just want to make sure that we've all covered. Let me just check Zoom. I think at this time that we have no more comments, but I really thank you all for being here today. I know we're going to have a lot more conversations about this and we're looking forward to those. I thank my colleagues for being here today and on Zoom. And with that, we are adjourning our meeting. I'm not entirely sure of our next time that we're going to meet, so we're going to save that for an announcement. Thanks so much. Take care.